This is the Vandy Sports Podcast. I'm your host, Chris Lee. Our guest today, Mitch Light of Athlon magazine, also the sideline reporter for Vanderbilt football. This episode presented by Wellspire, Nashville's Learning and Development Center. Wellspire offers personal and professional development opportunities in a beautiful facility in the Gulch neighborhood. Stop by for an event with world-renowned speakers or host an off-site event that will wow your team or your clients. We thank our co-sponsor, the Well Coffee House, which turns coffee into water and has a mission to bring clean water to the world. Friday's news presented by Sutherland and Belk, an SEC sports-loving injury firm in Nashville. These guys will shoot you straight on your rights and options when you've been injured in an accident. Call them at 615-846-6200 to get your questions answered. You can visit them online at sbinjurylaw.com. Good guys. If you have the need for that kind of service, I highly recommend checking Taylor and Russell out. Well, today's news not good. Kenyon Martin Jr., who just committed to Vanderbilt basketball less than a month ago, is not coming, will apparently play overseas instead. The three-star prospect had just committed again a few weeks ago. Mitch Light is on our guest line today, which is brought to you by Boll & Branch. That was started by Vanderbilt graduates Scott and Missy Tannen. I've slept on their sheets for years. They're phenomenal. Had no clue how comfortable they were until I got them. They are fair trade certified, which means they're made under safe conditions by men and women who are treated and paid fairly. What I'm about to say is the biggest waste of my time on the podcast all day. You can return them in a month. It doesn't matter. You're not going to want to. And once you have the sheets, try the mattress. That was voted best mattress of 2018. Go to bollandbranch.com. That is BOLL and branch.com. Enter the promo code Vandy. Get $50 off your first set. Our question and answer session is brought to you by Vanderbilt fan and independent insurance agent Josh Minton of Brentwood. If you need home, auto, motorcycle, renters, or landlord insurance or commercial insurance, Josh is the guy to call. He's my insurance agent, does a phenomenal job. You can reach him at 615-933-1979. Email him at josh@hqinsurance.com. Follow him on Facebook at jdmintonhq. He is my insurance agent. Give him a try, and you're going to be pleased. Mitch Light joins us. He is the executive editor at Athlon magazine. He is the sideline announcer for Vanderbilt football, and he joins us today with lots to talk about. We'll lead with some hoop stuff, of course, baseball on everybody's brain. Mitch, glad you're with us. Thanks for being here today.
Thanks for having me, Chris.
Let's lead with Kenyon Martin. I will qualify this by saying I don't know everything that happened. I will also say, without sort of revealing all that I know here, academics, I think, were always going to be an issue for him. I was surprised that he got into Vanderbilt. So I'm not going to say I was expecting what to happen with him declaring that he's going overseas, which, by the way, he's not really revealed specific plans for that as far as I have seen. What a weird saga, Mitch.
Yeah, it is, and especially kind of an out of nowhere recruit nationally. For the fact that he's got a famous name, you would think that just people would have known about him more. He's not that highly ranked, of course. I think in the 200s or something. But I didn't even know Kenyon Martin had a son who was of that age playing basketball, and I'm big Kenyon Martin fan. I grew up in New Jersey, a big Nets fan, so he was number one overall pick, had some good years there, so I've followed his career. So, yeah, I don't, strange situation, don't have any insight. Like you said, I had heard same things you, that academics might have been an issue, but then when Vanderbilt sends a press release, you think that he's been admitted to school. Maybe something along those lines happened. Maybe he's changed his mind that school wasn't for him. A lot came on the heels of the other, what's the recruit's name? Not R.J. Barrett, the other one, Hampton, who decided to skip college. He has a lot more options as a top 5 national recruit. Kenyon Martin, other than his name, does not bring a lot to the table as far as going to play overseas.
I do wonder in hindsight, not that he was a top of the hill recruit, but I wonder if the academics maybe didn't have to do more with him being uncommitted than the skill level.
Yeah, it could be. I mean, Don't know. It's sometimes not fair to speculate on stuff like that with, especially the kids' academics. So, I don't know if the story we'll ever find out. As far as the law, I think who knows what type of career he would have had in college. I thought the attributes that he supposedly brought to the table were something that would be a welcome sight to the program. Some toughness and undersized, power forward type for a team that lacks size. I think he could have been a valuable player, but we'll never find out.
No, and I'm with you. I think that he was the type of kid that they needed. I think they needed blue-collar, tough-minded kids to sort of transform that program. And the kids are getting, in terms of skill level, I think are fine. I don't know that they're SEC caliber, or at least elite SEC caliber, but that's more what they need.
Yeah, and, I think we've talked about this in the past, it's rare for a new coach to come in, except certain programs that recruit at a different level to come in and make a lot of headway in the spring. A lot of times, coaches just fill out a few remaining scholarships and accept some transfers and stuff like that. So I don't know. I don't necessarily think that this will be indicative of the type of recruit that this staff brings in. Just at this point, when they took over, coming off a winless SEC season, it wasn't like they were going to start reeling in 4 and 5 star recruits in the spring.
Yeah, I don't know what else to say about basketball. It's such just a strange time. I think that there are some positive signs, and I like the fact that they've devoted a lot of resources to basketball. But boy, it's going to be a big hill to climb for them.
Yeah, so I'm interested. I'm just interested to see how they look. With the new staff and how how they play, how they're coached. Just change brings. I'm just interested to see the change. I don't know. I know they've had some workouts. I think Vanderbilt released a video. They've had they'll have some summer workouts and stuff. I've interviewed Jerry Stackhouse once for a story for Vanderbilt Magazine. I'll be talking to him probably sometime in the next few weeks for my Athlon sports preview. I guess we'll find out once the season starts.
Yeah, and I think I've had this conversation with other people on the podcast. I don't know that I've had it with you, and if I have, please forgive me if we have. But my bar of expectation for the next year is basically this. Just look a lot better, have people convinced that you're heading in a better direction, and have a solid first recruiting class. I think if he does that, they can go 9-23 or whatever, and I think I will be satisfied that there has been progress made.
Exactly. I think that's bottom line. Any different fan bases and different sports, whether pro or college, have different expectations. But as a fan of a sport, you want to believe that your team's well coached, and your coaches is getting as much out of the players as possible. So that, I agree. The record, obviously, we want to see Vanderbilt do well next year, but the record is not that big of a deal because expectations won't be high. It's just, do they look well coached so that when the talent level does increase, you can have realistic expectations that they'll live up to those.
I was thinking about this. Let's say that it takes him 2 or 3 years to get turned around. By that point, that's a basketball program that will have gone a decade without doing much of significance. I mean, it'll been that long, I guess, since it won an NCAA game, assuming it's 2 or 3 more years. It's going to be a long drought, I think, by the time we see some light again.
Yeah, it could be 2 or 3 years, definitely. After a really good stretch, an underrated stretch. I'm one that thinks that, I know college basketball is a tournament sport. So if you don't do well in the NCAA tournament, people don't really care. But if you look from, even going back to 2004, if you want to start at 2007 again, for about a 10-year period under Kevin Stallings, or an 8-year period, that there was a lot of success, a lot of regular season success, but obviously not the type of postseason success that people wanted. So, there have been 2 recent NCAA tournament appearances, but one a first 4 bow out, and then the next one a round of 64 bow out.
True or false? If Kevin Stallings weren't such a jerk with his personality in a lot of ways, he would still be the coach at Vanderbilt.
Yeah, I think that's fair to say true. I think people liked I think he rubbed a lot of people the wrong way, both within the school and fans too. I think, see if you agree with me on this. I don't think many people didn't think he was a good coach. Do you agree with that? I think most people, whether you liked him or not, thought he was a good coach. Would you agree?
I do. I always thought that was a little bit underrated because I didn't think that he got the most out of his best teams. Now, X's and O's, I
That's
don't. I will leave that to the people that understand that. Now, I do think there's a little bit of a halo effect in basketball commentary, especially with people who have a lot of the commentators are people who've been coaches. You rarely hear them criticize other
right.
coaches, but that was said so often. I think there was something to that. My knock on Kevin was he just never got the best out of his best teams. There was a kind of a centrifuge effect in that everything got pulled to the middle. If he had a team that wasn't very good, he made it better than anybody thought. If he had a team that was really good, they always managed to underachieve. And that's where people don't forgive you. They don't really care a lot of times if you do decent things with the bad team, but if you do okay things with the good to great team, that's where you get fired.
Yeah, no, I agree with all that, and I think that all, some, just ability to relate to players, personality, all that stuff, factored into it. So it was just we don't need to rehash the Kevin Stallings era. We've done a lot. It was just a weird tenure with peaks and valleys, and enough peaks that enabled him to coach at Vanderbilt for a very long time.
Yeah, and back to the personality thing before we move on to the next thing. I think that you saw a lot of this with Bryce Drew. I think if you're a good person and treat people well, people will forgive a lot. And a lot of the people that were most vocal at wanting Kevin out were the most vocal that they should not have gotten rid of Bryce Drew. Now, I'm not going to say it was always split along those lines and it was at 100% of the time, but that goes back to the question I asked you. I do think that there was a lot with that. I just think that I heard stories from people internally of how big a pain he was to work with. I just think that's an interesting way to look at it now in hindsight. So
yeah, I think some of the recruiting tailed off too, especially when his son was playing college baseball and maybe he wasn't, after he had some really good years, wasn't on the road as much. And then there's some years after some good, after some of those good years in the 10, 11, 12, where they came really close to some really good recruiting classes and just missed on some guys. And then they had to take some guys, down their list. And then kind of after that, your talent level dips a little bit. And then, obviously we saw what happened.
yeah, I think that was ultimately the thing that got him as he had that down period before his last little hurrah. Where they didn't have really good players for a few years because he didn't hit it hard at recruiting. And then when he had talent again with Baldwin and Jones and those guys, they didn't do much with it. So anyway, we've been over that at one point or another. Let's talk baseball. I guess the big question on my mind, and I sent an email to Vanderbilt this morning. It's not been answered at this point, which is not a criticism of them. I think super regionals in regional play, they were just swamped. But I'm still waiting to see what the contingency plan is if they don't play. And as I'm sitting here in Franklin, Tennessee, doing this podcast on Friday morning, it was raining pretty hard earlier. There's already a lot of standing water in and around my house. Now, the field will drain. I guess the question will be, will it let up enough around game time for them to be able to play Friday night? And then the bigger question is, I'm looking at weather.com. I'm going to check it again as we speak, but I looked at it yesterday. Yeah, it's still the same thing. It is showing it literally is supposed to rain, about a 70% chance. It looks like it does tail off tonight. 70% chance at 5, 70% chance at 6, 50% chance at 7, no rain. 30% chance of rain right at sunset, 40% chance of rain at 9, nothing at 10 and 11. Then it starts to pick up again with the 50% chance or less around midnight. Looks to me like there's a window that they get the game in tonight, perhaps a little late. And in Saturday, Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, I've got the rain icon. Well, not Tuesday, but Saturday, Sunday, and Monday. And I don't know if that means it rains all day or it rains a lot of the day. And this is the thunderstorm icon. So that's not good either. So anyway, I did a lot of questions as to when and how they get this thing in.
Yeah, and I don't know if you follow Nashville Severe Weather on Twitter. I think he said earlier today that like you said, that it could tail off early evening. And as I asked you before we got on, like I'm sure because of TV that they will do all they can to start the game at 5. But if it looks like they are not, if it looks like there's no chance of them starting at 5, what's the point of getting pitchers warmed up and all that stuff? They can just push the game back. But it's not just here. There's a regional supposed to start at 11 a.m. Central Time in Louisville, which I think the weather's bad. There's one in Starkville and Baton Rouge too. I think the weather's supposed to be bad throughout there too. So fortunately, this at least starts on a Friday. Correct me if I'm wrong. I can remember. Am I remembering this correctly? That there have been some super regionals that have spilled over to Tuesday in recent years. I know that's not ideal for anybody as far as pitching, travel, all that stuff. But these are games that they have to get in.
Mitch, I don't remember to be exact. I think that's right, though. I mean, obviously, a lot of times they carry over to Monday. And I'm going to send a question back at you. What's the format? Because I don't remember this either. In Omaha, do they start with one side of the bracket and play that on Saturdays and do the other one on Sundays? Or do they do that based on weather and okay, was one side of the bracket longer in getting its games in, and do they schedule it that way?
I'm glad. Yeah, a pet peeve of mine because I've run across some travel issues this year. If I recall correctly, and I'm pretty sure I'm right on this, in years past, I don't know if it was last year, but I know in years past, the 4 supers that started on Friday were on the same side of the bracket, and those teams started on Saturday in Omaha. The 4 teams that were on the other side of the bracket started their supers on Saturday, and they started on Sunday. Obviously, it's the fairest way to go about it. Everyone has the same amount of rest. So, because I'm planning going to Omaha with my son for the first weekend, so I was looking for flights. I was going to wait until they announced the super pairings last Tuesday. Well, they didn't do it that way. For instance, UCLA's super starts today too, and they're on the opposite side. So NCAA is now saying that the Omaha schedule won't be released until Tuesday morning. Well, what if the games aren't done Tuesday morning? So I would think that if any spill over into Tuesday, that at least the least they can do, those teams would not start in Omaha till Sunday.
Well, I won't give you a rant on the NCAA and common sense today. I've done that a few times lately, but let's hope that that's how it goes. This is potentially a mess.
Yeah, no, I mean, it stinks just as a fan. I mean, I've got tickets and stuff last week was the first time I think Vanderbilt's hosted a regional that I can remember with no weather issues at all. The weather was great all weekend, so maybe, the weather god's coming back. So, yeah, I mean, like I said, I'm curious to see what happens in Louisville today too, because they have an early start. They too have turf, but Mississippi State doesn't. So we'll see what happens. We've seen them play through a lot of bad weather. Ideally, you would not want such a game with such a importance to be played in poor weather, but they've got to get them in.
Are you going to Omaha?
That's the plan. If I can, yes, at some point I think I will.
Driving a flight.
I don't know yet. It depends on flights are very expensive to Omaha. I might look into flying to Kansas City and renting a car. I've been to Omaha twice. I drove once and I flew another time. So, as I've said many times, I love the College World Series, but it's one of the hardest events to attend as a fan.
Kansas City to Omaha is what, still 3 to 4 hours?
Yeah. 3 hours, I think, yeah.
Okay, so it's still a ways. I have always driven it. I've done it, and it's one of those things. Here's my advice, because somebody asked me this week, if you were going, I would plan on, I don't know, a day and a half, 2 days. I think that the stopping points, Columbia, Missouri is one of them, and that's 7 hours away. I think that's close to halfway. That's a good stopping point. You could leave maybe on a Friday after work or something like that, drive late into the night and get up in the morning, and that way you don't have a drive that's too tough to bite off. So that's my advice. If you're going to drive it and have got some time, Columbia is not a bad place to stop. Or you could push it a little further, go to Kansas City. I don't know if the Royals are in town, maybe see a little baseball there, and then head to Omaha.
Yeah, I haven't figured out yet. It just depends on when Vanderbilt's playing and all that stuff. So, but I owe my son a road trip, so I think we're going to try and figure it out one way or the other.
Well, I'm planning on going. The problem is I don't think we can leave till Sunday. So I'm probably going to miss the first game, barring something crazy. But anyway, let's talk about the play on the field. What stood out to you in the regional?
Probably starting pitching. I think going in, that was we've talked about some of the bullpen concerns, but the starting pitching, again, I'm talking about Vanderbilt baseball right now, sort of like we talk about Alabama and Clemson football when I'm doing these interviews for our preseason top 25. Like, some of these teams that are so good in football, you don't talk about what they're good at. You kind of poke holes in what maybe could be a problem. Like Alabama's inside linebacker depth might not be as good as it usually is. So that's the way Vanderbilt's been playing so well with 25 wins, whatever the crazy number is. So so heading into the postseason, you're like, well, what could possibly hold this team back? And inconsistent starting pitching. We saw Patrick Raby in the SEC tournament. We saw, and maybe this isn't fair, but against Kentucky, Drake Fellows gave up a big lead. As good as the team's been, there's been times where the starting pitching hasn't been great. Well, other than going back to the SEC tournament, other than that Patrick Raby start, the starting pitching has been great. In the last weekend, it's as good as you could hope for. Especially in all three games, even though Vanderbilt won convincingly and the margin of victory ended up being pretty big, they were tight through 3, 4, 5 innings. So that they needed those starting pitchers to pitch well and got out of some big jams. So, you talk about the hitting, Julian Infante, all that, but the starting pitching is what stood out to me.
Yeah, I think the way that you put that with the Alabama inside linebacker depth analogy is really good. And there's sort of a false narrative. You say, well, so-and-so's been great lately, so they're safe with him. Well, that got blown up like with the Tyler Brown appearance the other day. On the other hand, I think there's some legitimacy to it when there's some consistency. Their three starting pitchers, assuming Hickman is their third, they have not announced the three for this weekend, but I would have to think he'd be the guy they'd throw out there. Boy, you start looking for flaws, and okay, the lineup 1 to 9 is as good or better than anybody's in the country, probably better. Starting pitching, their three guys have all been really good each of their last 2 starts, which again, that doesn't mean that it can't blow up. You look at their bullpen, unless Brown's velo is down, which I'll be watching to see, he's not a concern. He's one of the best closers in the country. Hugh Fisher it's not always the prettiest outing, but he's pretty dominant right now for the most part. Ethan Smith has been lights out. Jake Eater's been fantastic. Okay, that's 7 arms right there. You throw in Arabi if you need him, a King if you need him. Those guys have flashed good things at times. Maybe a Franklin who pitched well in that little stretch about a month ago. Everybody is going to have issues somewhere. I just look at their list of issues, and compared to probably what anybody else is facing, I have to think their list of concerns is probably shorter than anyone else's.
Yeah, no, I agree. And that's why, you look at all the odds. Vanderbilt, not the number 1 overall seed, but it's the prohibitive favorite to win the College World Series and to win this weekend. Now, I will say, I don't pretend to know a ton about Duke. I think the Duke team that's coming in here is much better than the 3rd seed, barely got in. They got up to like a 3-9 start in the ACC and then have been playing better. They figured out some pitching now. They don't have a ton of depth pitching, but this is not a great team, but it's not a bad team by any stretch.
It's not a bad team. I would push back on that maybe a little bit. It probably depends on who they've got. Because I think they don't have a couple of their better arms, which of course they've been without some of those guys for most of the year.
I'm talking about the team that basically has played in the last month.
Yeah.
If you start 3-9 in the ACC and end up getting into the regional, you've done some pretty good things.
Oh yeah, I think that. I mean, and they've had health issues all year. I think the big thing to me is whether their shortstop plays, because it's a big. I mean, that is like Vanderbilt. If Vanderbilt gets a guy hurt, we've talked relentlessly about how they can put another guy in and probably be fine with their bench depth. Their drop off from their shortstop, who's maybe their best hitter, to the guy that they played last weekend, who's basically literally a zero offensively. Now, it's been in limited sample size, but it is what it is. That's pretty astonishing. So I want to look for that. But on the other hand, they played with that kid last weekend and got through a regional anyway, and not an easy one in terms of pitching, because you had West Virginia's got a little bit. Texas A&M we know has pitching, so there's that.
Yeah, no, I mean, they played – that was a tough regional. We all thought Texas A&M was, from a Vanderbilt standpoint, that was the team you probably didn't want to see. And West Virginia was hosting for the first time in 50 years, so it's a great atmosphere up there. So, yeah, I mean, Duke they won a tough regional on the road, so give them a ton of credit.
Did you have any thoughts on – well, let's finish up with baseball first. Anything else before we talk draft for a moment?
No, I mean, there's really not that much. Baseball, there's it's funny because this lineup is so solidified. Basically, the same lineup for so long. There's no debate. Like, should they go with this guy? Should you go with the righty versus the lefty? You know, there's not much to talk about as far as approach. The only debate is, should Hickman be the number 3 starter? Well, hopefully they don't need a number 3 starter, but I think we agree that he should be. Like, that's pretty much the only question. The bullpen roles are kind of being solidified, and like I said, the lineup has been the same lineup for about a month.
Let's talk about the draft. Let's start with J.J. Bleday. I was asked when can he get to the majors. I said I think he can start being a player who plays a significant role as early as next year. Am I too optimistic with that?
That's a good question. That's you just never know how quickly a guy is going to make the transition. The fact that he hits so well on the Cape and he's obviously hitting well this year, I would tend to agree with you. If I think I don't have the numbers or anything like that, but I think there's probably a pretty strong correlation between guys who hit well on the Cape before their junior year carry that over, that they make a quicker transition. Like during the draft, I don't know if it was on Twitter or watching the draft, I forgot who it was. Someone was drafted pretty in the first round who struggled mightily in the Cape. And the commentators were saying the track record of guys who struggle in the Cape before their junior year and just kind of shake it off and end up making the majors, it's a pretty short list. So I think JJ, because he hit so well there, that bodes well for him.
What if that was Andrew Vaughn that they were discussing?
No, it wasn't. It was someone lower in the first round, I think.
Okay. Yeah, I think the thing with Bleday is, and I don't have the splits in front of me, he hit righties a good bit better than he hit lefties. To me, that's the thing. He may need some work on that in the minors, but I just don't see a lot of holes in the game overall. I was looking this up this morning. They played 47 games against top 100 RPI teams this year, and most of those were top 50. I think he's played against great competition and performed exceptionally well. Once you do that, I don't know what there is left.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I think he's a better defender than he's getting credit for, just, watching some commentary, reading some stuff on him. Seems to have a good arm. And, so I don't think I could probably play either corner outfield spot. Probably looks like a right fielder, though.
Well, plus they're with the Marlins. It's not like that's a juggernaut offense. I mean, I think more of their talent is on the pitching side than the hitting side.
Yeah. So it just depends on how quickly they want to, force the issue. They're not anywhere. They're close to being competitive, so there's really no reason to rush them.
What else stood out to you in Vanderbilt's draft, whether that is current players being selected or recruits?
I was interested in Blaine McIntosh because my son plays at MLK, and MLK played Sycamore this year. And I didn't even know there was a kid from Sycamore committed, and that was when I was sick. I didn't go to the game. My wife came back and said, yeah, there was a guy on the other team, I think, who's committed to Vanderbilt. His dad was wearing all the Vanderbilt stuff and all this stuff. And then obviously looked him up and found out he was a late recruit for Vanderbilt, one of the last ones in. And evidently he's a pretty good player, drafted in the 13th round. I know there's some debate about the Mets being able to sign him, but that's pretty high for an under-the-radar guy like that. So I'm interested to see what happens to him. Sounds like a pretty good, very great athlete, potential center fielder of the future. So other than that, nothing really. I've been kind of obsessed with the Jack Leiter thing. I grew up a Yankees fan, and Al Leiter was my favorite player when he was coming up through their system, and still scarred from when they traded him for Jesse Barfield. So I saw Jack and Al Leiter at a game last year. I think it was the Duke series, in fact, and I was like, yeah, that'd be pretty cool if Al Leiter starts coming down to Hawkins Field a lot. So the fact that it's a strong indication that Jack's coming, I think is pretty cool.
If Al Leiter is listening to this podcast, you need to send Mitch Light an autographed photo.
Yeah, I found, this is funny. I have all my baseball cards that when my parents moved to Nashville about 5 years ago, they brought him down and basically said, these are yours. We're not keeping them in our house anymore. And I was going through some stuff the other day in our storage, and I found I have a plaque of Al Leiter rookie cards all up. So I might start bringing that to Hawkins Field next year. And then John Cusick can say anything when he holds the radio up over his head outside of our house. Might stand up hold that up for Al Leiter right by him. So that might not be weird. I don't.
No, that wouldn't be weird at all.
Yeah, good.
But if it is something you do, then please let me know because I would want a video of that.
Okay,
by all means.
I'll let you know.
We would put that all over Twitter. Well, it's funny. I was looking through some cards. I found a couple of 1988 Donruss Al Leiter rated rookies. That's probably what you've got as well.
Exactly. And Leiter also, like, I grew up, he lives in Summit, New Jersey, and I grew up literally in the town next to it, like half a mile from the town. Del Barton, the high school he went to, I had friends who went to Del Barton. It's funny, in New Jersey, not a lot of people go to private school, just not like it is in the South. So, like, Del Barton was, if a couple kids from my town went to Del Barton, but they were athletes and stuff. It was sort of like if you were a really good athlete, that's kind of where you went. But very, very familiar with the high school.
Still laughing about to say anything.
Yeah.
That was a great movie.
Great movie. And if podcast listeners like under 30, they probably don't know what we're talking about.
No, but I think that's one you need to watch. That was a kind of an enduring classic. So
yeah.
Let's see. The Macintosh. I'm glad you brought that up because I was going to bring that up as well. That's kind of the wild card at this point because you got two conflicting narratives. First of all, the Mets, I think, did that. They've got the Allen kid who is a Florida commit, and I think if the money is there to make a run at him, then that's probably where they go, and there's not a lot left. If they don't, then that's one that you might have to worry about. It's kind of the double whammy. It's like, do you get your guy or does your rival get their guy? And whichever one loses, that battle's going to be hurting.
Yeah, it's basically it's a win-win for Vanderbilt or a loss-loss. Now, I think, we don't know what type of player McIntosh is going to be for Vanderbilt. I think it's pretty clear that Allen's going to be, he's of the Jack Leiter mold, right? I mean, he's that highly thought of that, kind of plug him in, maybe not right from the start, but one of those, we've seen Florida have great starting pitching, which they didn't have this year. But, getting him not to sign with Florida and then getting your own recruit would be a nice thing for Vanderbilt.
Yeah, I'd say hurting, that's all relative. Those two teams, year in and year out, are two of the top five in the country, usually in talent. But J.J. Cooper, and I've not seen Blaine McIntosh play. I don't know a lot about him other than what's just been written.
Well, do you want my wife's detailed scouting report?
I would love your wife's scouting report. We should feature your wife's scouting reports more on this podcast.
Yeah, he was good. That was it.
Please thank her for the insight.
Yeah, I think she thinks my son Gabe, who's a freshman who didn't play in that game, was better. But that's her insight. That's her scouting report.
Oh, in that case, Vanderbilt needs to start recruiting your son.
Yes, I'll be sure they'll get on that.
You could put, scouts say better than kid that just got drafted in the top 500. So
perfect.
Right. Back to McIntosh. J.J. Cooper is really high on him. He did a tweet the other day out of their baseball or their BA 500 tiers, which is their top 500 prospects combined high school and college going to the draft. And J.J. Cooper he basically said, pick your one out of each tier. In other words, the 100s, the 200s, the 300s, and so on, that you think is, I'm paraphrasing, it could be wrong, got a chance to maybe be better than people think. And McIntosh was his one out of the 300s.
Yeah, I know JJ. He writes the prospect stuff for our magazine, and I was going to email him and ask him about McIntosh, but I didn't really want to, I don't really want to bother. Like I know it's like one of the busiest days of his year, so maybe I might follow up in a couple days when he's not as busy. But I did see that Cooper was high on him.
Or maybe in his 400s. I'm looking here at my list, and they had him 494. I could have sworn that he said in the 300s, but either way, his point was that McIntosh has got a chance to be a pretty good player, in his opinion. Yeah. So, all right, Mitch, any thoughts? I mean, man, it's to the point where it's kind of like basketball when they lost 20 in a row. They've won so many in a row in baseball. You feel like we've just about exhausted the topic.
Right. I mean, one noteworthy thing, I mean, J.J. Bleday hit the ball well, I guess, Friday night. But Vanderbilt did all that and rather quiet weekend from Austin Martin. And Bleday didn't exactly crush the ball. So, that's something to watch. Those two get going. Then, this team might have a pretty good offense. You never know.
Yeah, they got a chance. But I'm glad you mentioned Bleday because we didn't talk about the shift, the four outfielders. I wonder sometimes if teams don't throw a shift. It'd be interesting if I ever asked Tim about this off the record, not to really. I wonder if some of it, I mean, I'm sure it's like, okay, this is where the guy hits the ball and he hits it hard. That's got a lot to do with it. But I wonder sometimes how much of that is just a mess with somebody's head? Throw something out there right before an at bat that they've never seen just to throw him off his game.
Yeah, I mean, it could be. I mean, it can't not get you thinking as a hitter. That makes sense. Like, if you're mentally tough, and which I'm sure all these guys are, it shouldn't really affect you. But especially the first time you see it, it's got to enter your mind. Like, do you change your approach? Do you drop a bunt and all that stuff? So it's crazy. I mean, that was maybe the craziest shift I've seen.
Yeah, I would have to think he spent some time in the cage throwing some bunts down just in case.
Yeah. Yeah, and I don't know enough about, again, Duke, whether or not they, how much they shift and all that, but we'll find out. Hopefully we'll find out tonight because of the weather.
Yeah, I hope so too. I would hate for this to get delayed and just spend your weekend in baseball limbo, which is what happens when it rains a lot.
Right.
But Mitch, thank you for your thoughts today. Thank you for your wife's thoughts also.
Yeah, they're very valuable.
Yes, please.
This time she's got it. She might have a paid website soon for her scouting reports, but we'll give them out free this time.
You might get Wally pipped.
Yeah, that's fine with me.
Exactly.
Be careful what you wish for.
You would lose this big check that you get every week.
Yeah, exactly.
The one that's always in the mail. So
yeah, sure.
Well, Mitch, seriously, tell people where they can find you on Twitter, where they can find Athlon's Fine Football Preview magazine, which now has been on stands for a few weeks.
Yeah, athlonsports.com/store is where you can get any cover. But if you're listening to this podcast, would assume you'd want the Keyshawn Vaughn cover, our college football, SEC, and national magazine. Our national magazine is now over 300 pages. That's on newsstands everywhere, should be everywhere. So please buy the magazine, and you can find me on Twitter, Athlon Mitch.
He is Mitch Light of Athlon. I'm Chris Lee of the Vandy Sports Podcast and VandySports.com. Thanks for listening. We'll catch you again next week.